When the Berlin Wall fell, there was an American State Department official named Francis Fukuyama, and he wrote a very influential essay called The End of History. For decades, capitalism had been in a struggle with communism. In his essay, Fukuyama argued that with the triumph of capitalism, we had come to the end of history, meaning we now know what humanity most strives for, which is a liberal consumer democracy where people feel empowered to have the freedom to buy whatever they want. For him, this was the apex of human civilization. This created what is called the unipolar moment, where America is the global hegemon. It created a world that is heavily globalized, capitalistic, and very individualistic. This is a very unique moment in human history. And we have now come to the end of this moment. All right, so let me first explain the three major characteristics of this unipolar moment. The first is what I call Pax Americana, where American power and American military might guarantee peace throughout the world. This is unique in human history because for the first time, there was a power that was able to dominate the entire globe, and America was able to do so through three mechanisms. The first is, of course, its military power, but specifically aerial supremacy, which is backed up by special forces and the CIA. So the CIA was able to infiltrate every single government in the world and identify who would be loyal to the American empire and then promote this person. If there were individuals who challenged the American empire, these people were demoted or eliminated. Nations that proved problematic, for example, maybe Syria or Libya, had special forces go in to sabotage the economy, and then air power would go in and destroy the government. Now, what is good about Pax Americana is that it did bring peace to very problematic regions. For example, in East Asia, Japan, South Korea, North Korea, China, and Vietnam did not compete against each other. They just participated in the global economy, which brought tremendous wealth and prosperity to the East Asia region. This was true also in Europe and South America as well. So that is aerial supremacy. Then you have something called surveillance. And basically what I mean by that is the internet. Believe it or not, the internet was created not to help you communicate or watch pornography. It was actually to create a mass surveillance system over the entire human population so that the Pentagon and the military knew exactly the vibe, the culture, the attitudes, and the emotions of each region. Through social media, through mechanisms such as Facebook and Twitter, they were able to manipulate certain emotions. So the second mechanism is mass surveillance through the publicization of the internet. The third is something called a rules-based international order. What this means is that American power hid behind multilateral organizations, such as the United Nations, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization. So people did not notice that the American empire was dominating everything. They believed that the world was fair and just, and that through logic, reason, and debate, they could present their case. So for the longest time, this Pax Americana provided peace and stability to the world, which brought tremendous prosperity. That is number one. Number two is the supremacy of science. For most of human history, people were religious. They believed in gods, but with the rise of Pax Americana, science became the dominant religion of the whole world. The best example is COVID raging across the world, and then vaccines were introduced. Now, I teach critical thinking skills, so when I first heard about vaccines, I was a bit skeptical. I said to my friends who are Chinese and American, vaccines used to take about 10 years to develop, and that is when the virus is stable and has been around for centuries. But COVID is constantly mutating, and they have not done enough trial research. So is it really safe to take these vaccines? Whether they were Chinese or American, their response was the same, which is, how dare you question science? You are a peasant. Have you gone to school? Have you no culture? Can you not think? And this shows you how science has become the new religion of the world. If you think about it, these scientists who run the world are actually transnational priests. Science is an international brotherhood. If you are a scientist in China, you are not actually loyal to China. You are loyal to the International Order of Science because that is how you get promoted. You get published in Nature or Science. If you win an award like the Nobel Prize, that is how you get rewarded. So you are better off being loyal to the brotherhood of science rather than your own nation state. And of course, it is the American empire that controls science. The third unique aspect of the unipolar moment is the universality of the US dollar. It is an incredible thing. Think about how it is just a piece of paper, yet you think it is gold. You think there is value in it, and not just you, but everyone around you. So that if you take your US dollars, you can go anywhere in the world and buy yourself a villa, enjoy a nice vacation, or fly around. But not only that, you aspire in your life to accumulate as many US dollars as possible. Is there really a difference between $100 million and $100 billion? There is actually no difference. You cannot spend it. but you still want to achieve as much as possible. And as a result, you focus your entire life on accumulating as much as possible. So these are the three main pillars of the unipolar moment. Again, in the beginning, maybe in the early 1990s, this led to tremendous peace and prosperity throughout the world. The problem, though, is that over time, these three pillars started to decay. Pax Americana started to ignore the rules-based international order which it itself had created. America started to bomb countries such as Libya and Syria without actual approval. Most recently, it went to attack Iran without even asking for the opinion of the world, without even caring what the world thought. This leads to the idea of hubris. Maybe the first generation appreciates the importance of collaboration and consensus, but the second generation, the children, are arrogant. They have hubris. They want to enjoy their power. That is problem number one. As for the supremacy of science, it basically becomes a religion in itself, an orthodoxy, so that science does not become the main engine of innovation in the world. It becomes the main engine of orthodoxy or suppression. That is why, for the past 20 or 30 years, we have seen very little in terms of technological innovation. Do not tell me Silicon Valley is the center of innovation in the world. All they do is make food delivery apps. It has been a long time since we have seen massive innovation in the world. What we have seen these past 20 or 30 years is the scaling out, the popularization of innovation, where American technology is spread throughout the world, especially in China, but we have not seen major innovation in science itself. And the third thing is that the universality of the US dollar leads to printing dollars, or basically corruption. Because America is able to print as many US dollars as it wants to fund its corruption, it does so. So the US dollar has lessened in value. What this means is that it has made inequality worse. It has made corruption worse. It has made people very lazy. Because if you are a young person, you say to yourself, no matter how hard I work, I am still screwed in the end because the boomers, the older generation, have so much more money than I do, I can never catch up. So either you refuse to play this game, so you quiet quit or lie flat, or you gamble. You pray that if you put $1 million in Bitcoin, it will go up to 10 million, or in the stock market or sports betting. That is why in America, gambling has become so popular. So this has led to today. We should not see this war against Iran as just a decision of one person, Donald Trump, or the machinations of a country like Israel. Really, this war in Iran is happening because we have come to the end of the unipolar moment, because the American empire has become corrupt, self-indulgent, lazy, and arrogant. With the end of the American empire, with the end of Pax Americana, we are shifting toward a new world. In this new world, some will survive and most will not. This is true throughout history. When empire declines and the world order is shifting, where there is a paradigm shift, people are forced to make a hard choice, either adapt or die. So let me show you how the world needs to change if it is to survive. Basically, what has happened is that we have to move from an emphasis on efficiency to resilience. That is the main goal in the future. Today, it is really about how to make things as cheap as possible and get them to as many people as quickly as possible in order to make as much money as possible. That is the idea of efficiency, generating as much profit as possible. The idea of resilience is to appreciate that there will be a series of crises, and what you need to do is focus on adapting to and surviving these crises. For a nation or a community to survive in the future, there have to be three major changes. If you are able to make these three major changes, you will survive. If you do not make these changes, you will be eliminated. It will be survival of the fittest. The first thing you need to do is move from materialism to spirituality. Right now, nation-states have convinced the population that what matters is your material well-being. If you are driving a car, if you have a house, if you have enough food to eat, then you should shut up and obey because we are doing our job. But in the future, governments cannot do that because there are not enough resources to go around. The way they feel differently has to make you believe that what matters is your happiness, your well-being, your spirituality, and that usually means a renewed focus on religion. That is the first thing. The second thing is to move from a system of individuality to community and family. What this means is that today, what you are taught in school, what you are taught in society, is that what matters is you, me, the ego. If it is doing well for me, it is good. I do not actually care about other people. In the future, you have to focus on building a community and on helping others. The last major shift is from the old to the young. Today, most countries, especially the wealthy Western industrial nations, are controlled by the baby boomers, the elderly, the gerontocracy. They have all the money and all the power, But for a nation to thrive in the future, this power needs to shift to a younger generation. Ideally, maybe people in their 30s. The younger, the better. You think this is easy to do? It is not. First of all, these baby boomers have access to the best healthcare in the world. They have a lot of money, they really enjoy living, and they are also really selfish. So this is actually the hardest problem to solve for most Western societies. How do you transfer power from the old to the young? Quite honestly, historically, we have never faced this problem before because the old simply did not live that long. Now, baby boomers are living to at least 100 years old, so they stay another 20 years in power. Meanwhile, the young cannot develop the experience and expertise in order to lead the nation. So whichever nation figures out this problem first, how to remove the old and give power to the young will most likely thrive in the new world that is coming. If you were to ask me which nation would most likely achieve this first, I would say Japan. The reason is very simple. In Japan, this problem is the most present. They have the oldest population in the world, so they need to resolve this issue really quickly, maybe in the next 5 to 10 years. I think Japan will actually resolve this issue, but it may be the only nation that is able to resolve it because it is so difficult. You love your grandparents. Do you want to see your grandparents die? Of course not. You are going against human biological nature. So that is the main argument I want to make today. What we are going to do now is look at how the world is going to transform because of what is happening in the Middle East, because of this war in Iran. Basically, we are in a new world because our world today is built entirely on access to cheap petroleum products, cheap energy. Why are you allowed to be in school learning from me rather than in the fields farming? Because of energy. Because of oil from the Middle East. Your computer is based on what? Petroleum. This camera filming is based on what? Petroleum. This iPad, petroleum. This clothing, petroleum. The medicine you take, petroleum. The food that you eat comes from fertilizers, which are also based on petroleum. So basically everything in this room, everything in the world is based on cheap petroleum. The entire global economy, its main foundation is cheap petroleum. So what happens in a world where petroleum is not cheap? Now you need a massive rebalancing in the world. The other thing about the world is the GCC countries, the Middle East countries. As you can see, this is really important. Around the year 2005, they started to have massive account surpluses, meaning they were selling so much oil they could not really spend all their money. Do you know why? What happened in 2004 or 2005 that made these countries extremely wealthy? China. Think about it. What is China doing? In the 1980s and 1990s, China was building factories. Then China wanted to develop its industrial base. And how do you do that? By importing oil from the GCC. That is why we have these skyscrapers, these malls, these roads, because China was able to import all this cheap oil from the GCC. Then the GCC would take this money and invest it back into the American stock market. But not just that, they would invest in Africa. They would invest in infrastructure. So for the longest time, the Chinese economy and the GCC were the two main pillars of the entire global economy. What this means is that if the GCC is no longer able to export oil, this will have a major impact on China. And together the two are going to have a major impact on the global economy. Basically, the global economy is dead. Another thing that you may not be aware of is that today flying around the world is very simple to do. If you want, we could get our mobiles out right now, go to a website, look at where we are going to fly tonight, pay using a credit card, take a taxi to the airport, get on a flight, and be there the next morning. That is really impressive. Guess what, guys? You could not do this 20 years ago. The technology was around, but it was not widely available. Now look at this, where the entire world is interconnected. In 1950, it was considered a tremendous luxury to fly. You had to be a millionaire basically to want to fly for vacation. Everyone else just drove a car. Now anyone can do it, and again, this happened just in the past 30 or 40 years. This, of course, is because of Pax Americana, where Pax Americana guaranteed there was no problem in the world, and therefore planes could just fly around rather than be shot down. Well, this world is coming to an end. In the future, flights will be very expensive, and vacations will be unaffordable. This is the internet, guys. You think that the internet is just there when you open a computer. No, actually, the internet is undersea cables that connect the entire world. Unfortunately, there is a war going on right here, and it is really easy for Iran to cut off the undersea cables, which would lead to internet disruption for maybe 20 or 30% of the world. Africa, India, the Middle East, maybe parts of Europe would lose internet access. You think, okay, that is fine. They just will not watch Netflix anymore. No, guys, the entire economy is based off the cloud. So if you want banking, finance, All of this would have a huge impact on the world. This could happen at any time, where for whatever reason there is a war going on in a certain region, some cables get cut off, and suddenly you have lost internet access. This would basically cause major disruptions throughout the world. One thing you notice about this world is the sheer amount of population growth, where after World War II, because of Pax Americana, you see a massive boom in population. Unfortunately, this is not sustainable. It is not possible for the planet to sustain 8 billion people, many of whom want to fly around the world twice a year, who want to drive an SUV, who want to have avocados every day, who want cherries every single day. So this population growth is not sustainable. And basically, what happens is this. When you are too off balance, when there is a correction, the correction is pretty extreme. The fact that we have so many people means that if there is a crisis, the population will see a massive shrinkage. You ask, how? The answer is food scarcity. Food today is pretty common, but food is based on global trade. The yellow areas are places that need fertilizer to grow food, meaning their land is not good for farming. They also have a large population. A lot of this is based in Africa, Central Asia, and parts of South America. Ammonia is produced from oil, from petroleum, and that is fundamental for fertilizers. As you can see, this is mainly in the north of the world. What allows for the young population is the fact that the north is able to export fertilizer to the south. That is it, guys. If this were to stop for any reason, people in the south would be in a lot of trouble. This trade in fertilizer is what sustains a global population of 8 billion people. Again, if there is a disruption to this trade, the people in the south are in a lot of trouble. If you are in the green, you are okay. But if you are in the red, you are in a lot of trouble. Honestly, if you are not in the green, you could still be in a lot of trouble, because what we are looking for is resilience. The idea of efficiency is, let us imagine the best case scenario and try to make as much money out of it as possible. The idea of resilience is, let us imagine the worst case scenario and see if you can survive it. Basically, if you have food security issues, you are facing a massive problem. Again, if you are not in the green, you should be worrying right now. And where is China? Not in the green. It is something that national leaders in the world should be talking about right now. Food scarcity. Water is another issue. Some of the countries that suffer from food scarcity also suffer from water scarcity. This area is in a lot of trouble. I would say that water is far more problematic than food. Again, if you are any country in this area, you should be worried. Freedom is also a very important issue because freedom is important for resilience. When there is a crisis, leaders in the population need to collectively make sacrifices. But when there is very little freedom, meaning there is very little transparency and accountability, where the public does not have access to the leadership, then the leadership could possibly make selfish, self-defeating decisions and the public is not involved. Therefore, the public refuses to make the sacrifices necessary in order to make the nation survive. So this leads to conflict around the world. Countries that suffer the most from food issues and water issues are also most likely to come into conflict with other people. This is a map of nations at war. The red means they are at war. You can see Africa and the Middle East are especially under a lot of conflict and a lot of stress, while at the same time suffering from food scarcity and water issues. Another issue I want to bring up is the idea of megacities, meaning cities that have over 10 million people. You think megacities are amazing because you have shopping malls and skyscrapers. No, guys, megacities are really bad. Megacities should not exist. They exist because of globalization. What many cities do is bring in a lot of people, have them specialize in a particular area, make it industrial, and then export it to the rest of the world. Where are most megacities located? India and China. That is a problem because India and China both suffer from food and water issues. If you are to be resilient, you actually want most of your population not in cities, but in the countryside growing food. Because first of all, they are self-sufficient, and second, you will have a food supply. Unfortunately, right now, China imports a quarter of its food. Also remember, food requires energy to grow, and China imports 75% of its oil. This brings up the question of how resilient China is. But not just China. Any big country with a megacity or too many megacities, India specifically, will face problems in the future. Again, if you are a national leader, you should be worried right now. With this war and disruptions to global trade, we should expect massive instability in nations that are not very resilient, that have very little freedom, that have food issues, and that have water issues. So you would see revolutions, wars, and famines, which lead to massive migration. These are migration trends we are already seeing, where people from Africa and the Middle East are moving to Europe, and people from South America and Latin America are moving to the United States. We should expect these trends not only to continue, but to accelerate, maybe 100 times. You think, okay, what Europe and North America can do is just build walls. They should right now build a wall because you are going to see a massive influx of refugees due to food and water issues. Unfortunately, Europe and America have a huge problem, and the problem is aging. In 2020, the countries in purple were countries that had a significant elderly population. By 2050, the entire northern hemisphere will have a significant elderly population. So the north, the industrial economies are aging very rapidly, which means their only option is to bring in cheap, desperate workers from the south who are fleeing conflict zones in order to run their economies. The problem with this, of course, is that it will lead to cultural conflict, where the local populations, the native populations, will feel that they are being replaced by these refugees and immigrants. This will probably lead to civil conflict within North America and within Europe. Unfortunately, there is really no way around this issue because the elderly are in control and they want people to mow their lawns, nourish them, and deliver food to them. Young people do not have to do that because their parents have money. So one way around this issue is by importing cheap immigrant labor. With the end of Pax Americana, what you will see emerge is regional trading blocs, basically the idea of mercantilism. For most of human history, this was what we did. There was no one power that controlled the entire world. What happened was that maybe you had a local hegemon which guaranteed trade among its allies. You did not trade with other people. You only traded within your regional trading bloc. That is the world we are heading back toward. This is a map of the 16th and 17th centuries, where you had these mercantile empires like the British, the Portuguese, the French, and the Spanish, and they had their own trade networks. They refused to work with each other. But the system worked fine. It was more expensive and not so convenient, but it still worked. So this does not mean the end of global trade. It just means much more limited global trade. Another thing you will notice about these earlier economies is slaves. Slaves were a very important part of trade. The reason is simple. You need energy to run society. Today we use oil. Back then they used human beings. If you no longer have access to cheap oil, what you do is enslave people, and that is the way historically we have done things. The last thing I want to talk about is religion. Because remember, the idea of resilience is that you need people to focus more on spirituality and less on materialism. If they focus on materialism, their lives are getting worse and worse. So you need to cause a national spiritual rejuvenation in your country. If you are in the gray, you might have issues because your people are not religious and are too materialistic. Unfortunately, East Asia, Japan, China, Korea, and Vietnam are especially non-religious. That is going to be a problem for them in the future. So let us summarize what we have learned so far. What are some major trends we should expect over the next 10, 20 years? If you really believe that next week Donald Trump and Iran are going to come to a peace agreement, or that maybe in 5 or 6 months both Iran and the United States will exhaust themselves, the global economy will suffer too much, and then they will just stop the war and things will go back to normal, I do not know what to tell you. You are living in a fantasy world. You have to wake up and recognize that this is the end of the unipolar moment. We are moving toward a new world. You have to choose to adapt to this new world or you will die. It is that simple. A massive trend is deindustrialization and deurbanization, where people in the cities will have to move back to the countryside, especially young people. They have to learn real skills, no more cryptocurrency trading, learn how to milk a cow or kill a chicken or do something useful with your life. Nationalism and remilitarization are very important, where you have to get young people willing to fight and defend your land. That means getting them to believe that your nation deserves to be strong. So whichever nations are most ready and most able to excite their younger population into fighting wars will be the ones that are most resilient. Then you have independent trading blocs, resource wars, famines, genocides, slavery. Remember, for most of human history, humans were the cheap entity. If you do not have access to cheap oil, then you are going to enslave human beings. This is not a pretty future, but it is a future that could happen, and you have to mentally prepare yourself for this possibility. Then there is mass migration, where people in the South are most likely to suffer from resource wars over water, food, and people, so they escape to Europe and North America. Then revolution, civil wars, and political instability in America and in Europe, because the baby boomers refuse to retire from the scene. These are aging populations with massive inequality, massive corruption, and massive stagnation. So this will lead to chaos in the streets. Religion is a big thing. If you are not religious, I actually recommend looking into the possibility of becoming religious. It is going to be very useful for what is going to happen later on. These are things I will talk about more in the future, but I will bring them up now, like how I see the world in 10 or 20 years' time. I think there will eventually be an alliance between Russia and Germany in Europe. Maybe for the next 5 or 10 years, Germany and Russia will go to war against each other, but eventually what the two will figure out is that they should actually be working together rather than fighting against each other. Then you have Pax Judaica. Remember, the entire point of this war in Iran, from Israel's perspective, is to knock America out of the Middle East and establish itself as the local hegemon and then become Pax Judaica. So I think Israel will come to dominate the Middle East. But then you ask, what about Iran? I know this is hard to understand, but if the United States were to leave the scene and Israel and Iran had to go to war against each other, what would happen is they would say, why? Israel is like, I do not want Persia, and Iran is like, I do not want Israel, and Israel has nuclear weapons. So they would agree to split the Middle East up, where Iran controls Hormuz and Israel controls the Levant. Historically, actually, the Jewish people hated the Greeks, they hated the Romans, but they actually liked the Persians. So there is this history going back where Persians and Jews actually get along very well. In fact, in the Middle East, the place outside Israel with the largest Jewish population is Iran, and they are very well treated there. So I do not see why, if America were to leave the scene, Israel and Iran could not come to a mutually satisfactory agreement that benefits both nations. Japan, again, I think the major problem facing all Western industrial nations is the aging crisis. What do you do with people who are 90 years old, who cannot get out of the house, whose brains are not really functioning properly, but who still control all the money, all the power, and are extremely influential? In most countries, you cannot do anything about it. But Japan is a very special country where the elderly have more obligation to the nation and to the people. So it could be a situation where Japan is in a lot of trouble and the elderly voluntarily choose to exit power and give it to the young. I think Japan is the only nation that would do this voluntarily. In every other nation, basically there have to be wars in order for the young to rise to power. Then there is the American Holy Empire. The nation that is most capable of surviving the next few decades of tribulation and crisis is America. Why? America is so incredibly wealthy. It is protected by 2 oceans. It really controls Canada and Mexico. So think of America not just as the United States, but really as having all of North America and Latin America in its sphere. That entire sphere is basically America. So it has unlimited resources and unlimited population. Also, America and the Americans are the most creative, the most entrepreneurial, and the most energetic people in the world. So I would not bet against America. But what I think will happen is that America will need a new identity in order to survive the age of tribulation. It will go from Pax Americana, which is a secular global idea, to one that is much more nationalistic, more focused on community and nation. And that means embracing Christianity. I think Christianity will be the force that rebuilds America after the many crises America will face over the next few years. The last thing that will happen is techno-Marxism, where nations that have the resources will want to institute an AI surveillance state to better marshal limited resources, basically to better control their people. This is something we will talk about later on. But basically you will have this sharp division of people into different classes, where at the very top you have freedom, but people at the very bottom become slaves or serfs. So that is it for the trends I see in the future. Again, you have to give up the illusion that this war will end soon, and that once this war ends, we will go back to the way things were before the war. No, the world has completely changed. We are not going back to the old world. We are going to a new world. And what this new world will look like is something that we can choose to control. Any questions? All right. So about the new world, will the relationships between countries all be changed, such as China and Japan and those 5 big countries? Will the order be changed? Okay. The best way to understand the geopolitical situation is that it is constantly in flux. It is constantly dynamic, meaning you cannot easily divide nation states into enemies anymore. Their alliances will constantly shift over time, and the nation-state system will also break apart into much more resilient communities. It is possible that nation-states become a series of city-states. Basically, think about the world in maybe the 1930s, or even China during the Warring States period. I cannot tell you that we will go to a new world and then this is exactly what it will look like. No, it will constantly change over time. Alliances will constantly shift over time. It is possible that in the beginning in East Asia, maybe Vietnam, Japan, South Korea, the United States, and Russia combine to contain China because they see China as the hegemon. But then they say, wait a minute, Japan is rising in power, so let us combine against Japan. It is a dynamic situation. Basically, what you have to understand is that everything you have been taught in school, everything you understand about the world, everything you believe to be true about the world will change. So you have to open your mind and be ready for constant political flux. Does that make sense? Any more questions, guys? All right. So now that we have looked at the world ahead for the next 10, 20, 50 years, who knows how long, what I want to do next, class, is examine how this war between the United States and Iran will eventually end.